Hello wonderful people, this month is Tourette Syndrome Awareness Month, so I thought that I would make a video reacting to some teachers of Reddit who don't understand Tourette's. Tourette syndrome is a neurological condition that causes uncontrollable movements and vocalizations called tics. Unfortunately, those of us with Tourette's are often misunderstood. People think that our tics are just a lack of willpower or something that we can control if we try hard enough. People might even think it's bad behaviour, and that's sadly what you'll see is the attitude from some of the teachers on Reddit, which is really unfortunate. I've already read through some of these and I'm already feeling frazzled and kind of disappointed in these sorts of teachers, but let's react to them. This one, literally just the title, is off to a bad start. It says, how do you hold students with mental disorders accountable? And for the most part, it's just a post about Tourette's. And Tourette's isn't even a mental disorder, it's a neurological condition like epilepsy or multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's. It's not a mental illness. So straight off the bat, this isn't going to be a good post. This is horrible. Something that I continue to see over and over again in schools are students who have certain disorders like anxiety disorders, Tourette's, etc. that aren't held accountable for behavioural issues. I'm just going to stop that there. Tourette's and anxiety, they're not behavioural issues, so that is ridiculous. I'm not trying to troll and I'm not trying to say that these issues aren't serious at all, but what concerns me is the students act out in a disruptive way, but parents, teachers and administrators say, oh, that's their disability. That's because it is. When a person with Tourette's has tics, that's not a behavioural problem. They're not doing it to disturb you. They're not doing it on purpose. It's literally just a misfired signal in the brain. For example, saying that Tourette's is a behavioural issue and saying that students should take accountability is the same as saying that a person with epilepsy is badly behaved if they have a seizure in the lesson and should learn to take accountability and stop being disruptive. It's a genetic neurological condition. You cannot control the tics. It really bothers me because this teacher is basically just saying that they're not going to listen to the parents, teachers or admin who understand the disability, and they're just going to go away and say, you know what, I don't care if they have a disability, they're a bad kid. Like, this teacher's clearly not open to learning from people who understand the condition better, which is just so frustrating. They say, I'll give you an example. I teach in a private school, so I don't see this often. I don't see this often. Apparently people with Tourette's don't exist in private schools. To be fair, the discrimination, it's elitist. They'll probably just kick us out, which is horrible. But I have a friend in a public school who has a student with Tourette syndrome. He has his good days and his bad. On good days he'll sit still, pay attention, and even ask some great questions and do well on homework. The teacher tries to reinforce this by telling him how well he's doing so that he'll learn what good behaviour is. People with Tourette's know what good behaviour is. Because again, Tourette's isn't a behavioural problem. The good days are just days where their tics will be milder, and their bad days will be days where they're ticking more. But because it's not a behavioural problem, it is really weird when they say, oh, you're doing so well right now, not ticking. Again, it's like saying to a student with asthma, oh, you're doing so well not having an asthma attack. Like, it's just weird because a person with Tourette's can't control their tics and it's not bad behaviour, so positive reinforcement obviously isn't going to work. Bad days, however, are difficult, they say. He'll often try to talk over the teacher and the classmates. He'll fall to the floor for no reason. I'm just going to stop that there. They're not trying to be disruptive when they fall to the floor. That is a tic, and honestly, it's a horrible tic. I've had that tic quite a lot, and I had to literally be held up by two people when I was in school to help me walk, and I remember being wheeled out of the People's Sports Centre in a wheelchair due to it. So this student isn't trying to be disruptive. They literally have a physical disability that causes uncontrollable movements, which unfortunately do make them drop to the floor sometimes, and it's very painful. I'd literally come home from school with bruises all over my legs from falling to the floor. I know people with Tourette's who actually dislocated their knees from that sort of tic. So the very fact that this teacher sees it as, oh, the student's just trying to be disruptive, it's so frustrating. It's a disability. They can't control it. And they also keep saying that the students trying to talk over the teacher, they might just be having vocal tics. They might not actually be speaking over the teacher. That's the thing. It might just be uncontrollable sounds they're making. They might not be trying to be disruptive at all. He'll argue with anyone who talks to him, and he'll often play the I didn't do anything at all card when he's told to stay quiet. But, well, he's right, he probably didn't do anything at all. He probably just has involuntary vocalizations and movements coming out because his brain's misfiring into signals, but he's not actually the one doing those movements because he can't control them. So, you know, you should probably listen to that kid when they're saying that he's not actually doing anything, because he's probably not doing anything on purpose. That's the thing. The teacher tries certain interventions to help him that she developed with the school counsellor, but the problem is that the student is never held accountable. Again, holding someone accountable for something that they have no control over doesn't really work. There's been times when the student has been outright disrespectful and has said some pretty homophobic and bigoted things. This might be coprolalia, like obviously there's no excuse for homophobia, but if it's coprolalia, meaning it's a tic, they don't mean what they tic. My tics unfortunately do say things that are quite offensive, and I do hate that, but because I have no control over it, thankfully when I was in school the teachers knew to ignore it. You know, I would tic homophobic things even though I'm a big ally to the LGBT community. I tic ableist things despite the fact that I'm disabled myself and, you know, a big disability advocate. I'm very passionate about that stuff. So obviously the very fact that I tic that stuff doesn't actually mean I want to say those things. In fact, with these kinds of tics, they often make us involuntarily say the very thing we don't want to say. The same as with intrusive thoughts, they often make people think the last thing they'd ever want to think. So it's so frustrating that the teacher isn't understanding that the student likely doesn't mean these things that they tic. Really frustrating. But when the teacher tries to give detention or reprimands him, the admin doesn't really back her up. Good. The administration knows that this is a tic, this is coprolalia. You can't punish someone for their tics, even if they're inappropriate tics, because they can't control them. I've said before, but you know, when I tic things like swear words or anything offensive really, as long as people know that it has no intention behind it, then it isn't really a problem. As long as people understand that those kinds of tics are really no different from me ticking anything else, like the word carrot or floorboard, literally. It just has no intention behind it, so it's really meaningless, and people learn to ignore it, and it fades into the background. So the very fact that they keep bringing this up is actually going to make these tics happen more, because that student's going to be anxious, thinking, oh, I really don't want to say this, I really don't want to say this because I'll get in trouble, but then it comes out involuntarily because they're thinking about it. The post then goes on to say, the kid isn't getting any better, again, because he has a genetic neurological condition that isn't going to be magically cured overnight because he can't control it, and the teacher is at her rope's end. This frustrates me, and I don't even teach him. Again, why are you offended that your friend has to teach a disabled student? Is your private school that elitist that you get offended by the very existence of disabled people in a school system? So my question is, why can't this kid be held to the same accountability as anyone else? Because he can't control it. Like, literally, little kids understand this better than this random teacher online. When my cousin was 8 years old, she said that she hated school because her friends would swear and stuff, and I said, like, do you feel the same way around me because my tics make me swear? And she went, well, no, because you can't control it and they can. So if an 8-year-old can understand that, the difference between doing something intentionally and unintentionally, then surely teachers can as well. They then go on to say, I get that this syndrome makes it harder for him to understand. Tourette syndrome doesn't make it harder for us to understand what's appropriate and inappropriate. We understand that sadly our tics can be inappropriate and disruptive, but no matter how much we know that and want to stop, we can't. Literally, this is the same as saying about, you know, why aren't deaf students punished for not listening? Like, it's the same sort of attitude, because it's a disability that the student cannot control. This is literally like saying, why aren't deaf students held accountable for not listening in class? It is ridiculous, this kind of attitude. Tourette syndrome is a disability. It's a physical disability, not a mental disorder like they're calling it. It's not a behavioural problem, and the student does understand what's appropriate and inappropriate, but they just can't control it. It then finishes off by saying, but my friend's concern is that he'll continue through high school like this and into the real world. And that's the thing, like, well, yeah, why is that a concern? Tourette's is a lifelong condition. I am an adult and I have swearing tics. I have tics where I throw things, hit walls. I do have very inappropriate tics. They aren't going to magically go away, especially not with discipline, because it's not a behavioural issue. The only issue that this student may face in adult life is coming across people like this teacher who refuse to understand. That's actually the biggest barrier we face. You know, sometimes it isn't my Tourette's that holds me back. It's just other people's attitudes, not wanting to include me. You know, going to a public venue and my tics aren't actually causing any problems, but the owner of the venue will want me to leave because they think I'm being disruptive, even though literally no one else in the building has a problem with my tics. So the only issue that this student's going to face in the real world is people like this teacher. It's the teacher that needs to change, not the student, because they can't change and they have a disability. This second one really boils my blood. It's just horrible. It starts off by them saying, I have a heavily autistic / Tourette's, spelt wrong, showing they haven't even taken the time to research the child's condition to try and understand them or their needs. Student in my language class who barely coped with English, and the administration expects me to teach him a foreign language. How the heck can I run a class with this kid constantly wandering around, trying to engage other students? Let me just stop that there. When they say that he barely coped with English, how do they know that? Because the thing is, an autistic person may struggle to verbally communicate in English, but that doesn't mean that they don't understand it. Does the student have a communication device? And, just because they struggle to write in English doesn't mean they don't understand it either. It can be an issue with coordination. I mean, I struggle to write properly because of poor coordination in my hands. I'm okay with typing though. But that's the thing, like, a lot of autistic advocates who have higher support needs, they're non-speaking and they may struggle to write or type. They understand how to do these things, but they physically can't because it's like apraxia. Their brain and body don't communicate in the way that most people's do. So the student actually may understand English very well. They might just struggle to verbally speak and type or write due to poor coordination and the brain not sending motor signals to the body. That's just frustrating straight off, where they just assume incompetence and they assume that the student doesn't cope with English when they actually might understand English. They're just not getting the support they need to communicate through like an AAC device or something. Yeah, when they say, how the heck can I run a class with this kid constantly wandering about and trying to engage with other students, that's usually a sign of hyperactivity. ADHD does often co-occur with Tourette's and autism, and therefore the solution for that isn't to punish the student, it's actually just to find something else that will allow that student to release hyperactivity. Instead of thinking of punishment, think of how you can make an accommodation, how you can make adjustments to support that student. For example, there are actually some really good resources, like some people have a sort of elastic band that goes around the chair legs and they can just pet their feet on that and kind of bounce on it, or they have a sort of cushion on their chair and they bounce on that, or fidget tools. Some people might think that that distracts the student more, but actually it can be a good way to release hyperactivity and prevent the student from feeling the need to wander around the classroom. They then go on to say that the student screams out random sounds when they're teaching, but that will be a vocal tic that they can't control. And the thing is that these vocal tics, although they can seem really disruptive, they can actually become background noise like any other noise in the classroom. And if students have sensory difficulties, then they can be offered earplugs so that the students' tics don't distract them. The student can't stop their tics and they are just as entitled to an education as any other student. So give the other students earbuds if, while they're working, they need some extra help to block out that noise in order to focus. But obviously, just educating the students is the most important thing as well, so the students understand that this, they're not trying to disrupt you, they just have a condition. It does become background noise if you just try your best to ignore it. So that's kind of frustrating. And then it says, he has a student aide who he screams at and never wants to sit with. Well, to be fair, he might not want to sit with the student aide because it might make him feel too different and he just might not be comfortable with that. And then it goes on to say, his mother insists he needs a normal experience, but he's denying other students the chance to enjoy learning a language. And that's really frustrating as well, because that's treating the student like an inconvenience for having a disability. And the other students might not even be that bothered by it. Like when I was in school, the teachers would sometimes act like I'm always being disruptive, but the students would actually reassure me that I'm really not bothering them. The tics, they can phase them out like background noise. So, haven't they tried that? Why do they just assume that a person with Tourette's and autism can't be in the class? They then say, anyone have advice on what I should do? I'd like to get him out of the class so I can do my job. That is just pure discrimination there and is against the law, quite frankly. This happened to me when I was in school with my language teacher. Basically, I was in year 9 and every time I ticked, the teacher would send me out of the class to stand outside for pretty much the whole lesson. And then it got to the point where I didn't even have to tick. I'd just walk in, not even sit down yet, and they'd send me out because they didn't want a student with my conditions in the class. And that sadly sounds like this teacher's perspective. I wouldn't be surprised. Imagine if this is the same teacher. It's not, obviously, but imagine if it was. It'd be so funny because sadly, that's the same sort of attitude my languages teacher had too. But it's just horrible. It's flat out discriminatory, and that teacher should actually just find ways to accommodate the student by providing fidgeting tools or things like that reduce hyperactivity, giving the other students earbuds if they want to block out the tics from the other student if they find it difficult to focus, and most importantly just educating the class that they don't mean to do this, it does become background noise. Students with Tourette's shouldn't be treated like an inconvenience for a disability that they can't control. Unfortunately, in both of these Reddit posts I've showed you, pretty much no one in the comments actually stuck up for the student. I mean, on this one, I think one comment did, but on the last one, none did. And sadly, on this one, there's kind of a cruel comment saying, how do the other children focus on anything as this child is going from desk to desk distracting them? It's going to cause a problem if it hasn't already. It's impossible to get work done if someone is interrupting them every 10 seconds. I can't imagine trying to learn a new language whilst the child is constantly screaming, shrieking, and wandering from desk to desk. But again, if accommodations are put in place, it becomes less of an issue. Mum sounds delusional. What does admin say? I'd tell you to document everything, but I'm sure you're already doing that. It's a tough situation all round. That's the thing, I do understand that it's difficult for teachers, 100%. Like, when I was in school, my teachers would struggle to teach the class because the entire lesson I'd just be swearing and screaming and shouting involuntarily. Thankfully, most of the teachers weren't punishing me because they knew I couldn't control it, but it was difficult for them because half the time, I couldn't hear what they're saying, the other students couldn't hear what they're saying, and they couldn't even speak. I was ticking so severely. So it is a difficult situation all around. For me personally, I wouldn't have actually minded private tuition, like if there was a way for me to go to student support and get the lesson done like one-to-one, but because I didn't have higher needs funding at that time, that wasn't really an option. That might be an option for the student, but also if the parent wants the child to be in a mainstream class, then that should at least be tried for a while, because the student may have academic potential. Having Tourette's doesn't mean you don't have academic potential. When I was in school, people did make assumptions about me. I remember sitting at a desk with two other girls, and they were basically, one of them asked the other girl, why does she do that, talking about my tics? And I was going to answer, but then the other girl just said, oh, don't worry, she doesn't understand what you're saying. And I'm thinking, yes, I do. And it's actually funny because I can surprise people showing that actually I do understand what you're saying. Just because I have Tourette's and autism doesn't mean I don't get what you're saying. And as well as that, when I was in engineering class in year 9 as well, I remember asking my teacher for help, and they would just, if I said, I'm struggling to save this file, they would just go, oh, and walk off without helping as if I just wasn't worth helping. And every time I put my hand up to ask a question, they'd ask the person next to me what I wanted. He wouldn't speak to me directly. So unfortunately, I have had this kind of attitude where teachers just assume that I'm incompetent and shouldn't be in mainstream. My school did try and move me out of mainstream when I was in year 10. So I sadly do understand this kind of attitude, but it's just sad because we can have academic potential and there is a way to meet that in a mainstream setting, even if it does require a really high level of support. Another comment then says, is the aide allowed to take them out of class? Is there any behaviour plan for when he disrupts the class? And that's 10 upvotes, and it's so frustrating because taking them out of class for having Tourette's is discrimination. They can't control it. They'll literally never be in class if you took them out every time they ticked, and that's the issue I had. I literally had to drop my French GCSE, despite the fact that I wasn't bad at French. I just wasn't given the chance because I was sent out of class every lesson. And having a behaviour plan for Tourette's isn't going to be helpful because it's not a behavioural problem, and that's like saying, has a student with epilepsy got a behavioural plan for having seizures in class? It's not going to help anything.